Hi, welcome to the second lesson of our Middle East topic. This lesson follows directly on from the last lesson we did. All you have to do is you have to listen to my voice and follow this video through. There'll be some opportunities for you to pause the video and have a go at some questions. And then at the end, there'll be 3 reviewed questions. For those, I would like you to answer them on a Word document, PowerPoint, or write them down and upload them to show my homework so I can have a little look through them. So, in the first lesson, you would have looked at what the Middle East is and where it is. The Middle East is a very strange concept in geography because it isn't a country, but it's also not a continent. In fact, it's actually a political construct which was created by the British and Americans to kind of describe a region that wasn't quite in Asia, wasn't quite in Europe, and wasn't quite in Africa. In fact, it kind of encompasses a little bit of all three. And it was called the Middle East because it wasn't as far east as places like China, which was known as the Far East, and it kind of described where it was geographically. In terms of the Middle East, most people have heard of it, and the reason why is it's very deep rooted in conflict, the Middle East. You'd have heard about the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, and things like that are ongoing quite a lot. You always hear about places like Syria and Yemen in the news as well. We're going to be looking at that later on in the unit and why that's happening. But today, we're going to be focusing on the climate of the Middle East. Now, in year 7 and year 8, you will have spent some time looking at something called a climate graph. And we're going to quickly recap that now by looking at a place in the Middle East which is called Dubai. So, the climate graph is quite simple. It shows two things. It shows temperature and it shows rainfall. And it shows those two things for each of the 12 months of the year. For the purpose of this, we are only going to look at the red line graph here. So temperature is shown by a line graph. On this one, we're going to focus on this red one here. And what it does is it shows you, on average, what the temperature is in that month. So for example, in December, for the temperature, I might say the average temperature is about 25, 26 degrees C. So if I went to Dubai at that time, that's kind of what I would be expecting. The rainfall is shown as a bar chart. And for this one, you do the same thing. You read across. So like I say, in December, there were 36 millimeters of rain. So we'll go through one more with you. So if we look at June, I go, okay, what is the temperature in June on average? I read up and I read across. On average, it's 36 degrees C in Dubai in June. I look across for the rainfall. There is no bar chart on there for June, so I can assume the answer to that would be 0. Right, now is the time I want you to pause the video and answer the questions in this box up here. Your answers will either be the numbers in the temperature or millimeters, or they will be the month. So you're telling me is it hottest in, coldest in, driest, wettest, which month, and then the highest, lowest temperature and rainfall. Remember, we're only looking at this red line graph here. So pause the video and have a go at these questions, and then unpause when you're ready to do so. Okay, hope you've had a go at that. So I can see the hottest month is August and the coldest is January. It is driest in May to October, so obviously there's quite a few months out here with no rainfall. And wettest in December. The highest temperature, 38, and lowest is 22. And the highest rainfall, again, is December, 36 millimeters, and the lowest is 0. But when we're looking at the Middle East, it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. Because most people have this view of the Middle East being desert. And for the most part, a large proportion of the Middle East is. A large percent would have a very similar climate to the climate graph I've just shown you, the one of Dubai there. However, there are also different climate zones within that as well. We have a Mediterranean climate, which is very similar to, if you've ever been to Turkey or Italy or southern Spain, it's a similar feel to that. We also have something called a semi-arid or a steppe, and that's a grassland. We'll look at that in a second. And those different areas, they're actually called a biome. Now, you would have looked at a biome when you did ecosystems in year 7. And a biome is an area that shares similar natural vegetation and animals. So the concept is if I'm looking at the desert, which was yellow on here, in theory, if I went to anywhere in that desert, I would find similar types of plants and animals. Same respect, if I went to these alpine mountain regions here, in purple, again, if I went there, I would expect to find very similar different types of plants and animals. So, the main one of the Middle East is the desert. Vegetation is sparse, some areas have almost none. The plants that do grow tend to be very prickly, like cactus-like, but for the most part, life or biodiversity in this area is very, very low. Um, And that's kind of the typical Middle Eastern climate that most of us have a perception of. However, not all of the Middle East is desert. It's also covered in this thing called a grassland, which is also called a steppe. And these areas do have grass, they do have some low bushes, but they don't have many trees. They're not huge forests. And these are the areas where people herd sheep and goats. And we also have some bigger animals now, like wild boar and gazelles. So even though the Middle East is this very hot region on average, in the grasslands, the climate is slightly wetter as well. So on our climate graph, we would be seeing that rainfall bar being much, much higher because that rain enables the sort of green areas to grow. And believe it or not, as we go to the tip of the Middle East towards places like Turkey, we do start to get some sort of forest and shrubland as well. So the Middle East itself has these huge desert regions, these big steppe or grassland regions, but it does have these forest and shrubland regions as well. You would find deciduous forest here. You might spot bears, deer, squirrel, that sort of thing as well. And I always find this quite surprising because my view of the Middle East doesn't look like this picture here. But actually, because geographically it's such a large area, it does actually encompass this type of biome in addition to just the desert biome that we've just seen. Now, the question I have about this is okay, so we understand now that the Middle East has multiple different biomes, its climate zones are mixed into lots of different things, but generally it's hot and dry. And my question is always, well, why is that? So, why is it that the Middle East on average is hot and dry? Why is it different to the climate in the UK that we have, where it tends to be quite mild and wet? Well, the key point here is if you look on my map at the bottom left here, the Tropic of Cancer runs directly through the Middle East. That's why the region is hot, and plus it is also not far from the equator. So because that tropic runs through, as we know that at the equator it's warmer, so for the most part that means that the Middle East is very, very warm. It's all because of its location and because the Tropic of Cancer is running through it. But here's an extra little point as well. Believe it or not, that picture there is actually taken in the Middle East as well. And if you remember back to our topic we did on the Arctic before we left school, I told you about something called altitude. And we discussed how as you go higher, as your altitude goes higher, it gets colder because there's less heat trapped in the air that's stopping that. Now, in the Middle East, there are some quite loud sorry, there are some quite high mountainous regions that exist, and therefore there are some areas in the Middle East that are snow covered, that are very, very cold, that are very, very icy. So if you went to some places in Iran and Turkey, you would still find those very, very cold alpine climates. And that links back all the way back to this little bit here. So you can see the alpine regions. If I went to these regions here, the chances are it would actually be extremely cold and basically the polar opposite of that desert that we are used to thinking and looking at when we regard the Middle East. Okay, so that's the end of me talking. There are now 3 questions I would like you to look through and upload, and they are as follows. Describe the 3 main climatic zones in the Middle East. For that one, all I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go back through this presentation, find 3 of the main zones, describe them, tell me about their climate, tell me about their vegetation, tell me what types of plants and animals live there as well. For the second one, it is explain why the Middle East has a generally hot and dry climate. Again, that's what I've just been talking to you about on the last slide. And the third question, explain why the Middle East has some cold regions. If you need to go back through the slide, you can rewind the video and you will hear me talking about why those colder areas exist in the Middle East and where they exist as well. So what I'd like to do is, I'd like you to have a go at those 3 questions. I'd like you to write them on a Word document, a PowerPoint, or you can even write them on a piece of paper. Upload them so I can have a look through them. And as I said, you can watch this video as many times as you want. So if you can't find the answers, do rewind the video back, or if not, you can ask me any further questions.